We felt scattered. I thought, why do we have two different financial advisors? One's doing one thing, one's doing another thing.
We felt sometimes like we were being guided in directions to spend extra money on things that probably weren't always necessary for us.
I would not know for sure if I should put my money in here or put it in there. Should I buy this real estate?
Like, I don't know what to do with this money, and I don't want to just blow it and spend it.
We were concerned about our financial health and just wanted a better financial picture.
And so when Earned came onto our radar and we sat down with our financial advisor, it just felt different.
I think a physician specifically should look at Earned because the focus is on our field. They know what a physician goes through at different phases of our career. To have that knowledge in order to guide us, I think, is just such an advantage.
Earned isn't just about giving us financial advice. They're about doing the things that are needed to be done in order for you to fulfill your financial plan that they have created with you. And that really was very meaningful to me.
Earned is kind of like the conductor of an orchestra. You know, you pull in the trombones, you pull in the trumpets, you pull in the percussion. But Earned is the one that's holding the baton. I feel trust that they're taking care of my entire financial picture, not just one little part of it.
As a physician, I know that what I do for people is really powerful and impactful, and it's important for me to know that the level of expertise that I'm working with for my financial health is there, and I have that trust for them.
It's definitely valuable because I don't have to go looking a million different places. Like, I don't have a lawyer over here, and I don't have, the insurance thing over here. Everything's under one roof.
Earned brings clarity to my financial life.
With Earned, I feel really well taken care of.
I feel my financial health is secure.
I feel supported.
Earned is security.
I would highly recommend any doctor to look at Earned.
I love what I do, and it's really important for me that my patients have the utmost trust that I'm taking the best care of them. I have that same amount of trust with my financial advisors at Earned.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are so excited that you are here today. Welcome to Protect What You've Earned, a physician's guide to asset protection, estate planning, and wealth strategy, brought to you by Earned and Physician on Fire. I'm Amber Eckerfield, Marketing Manager of Education and Experiences at Earned, and I will be your moderator for this webinar. As many of you know, Earned is a longtime partner of Physician on Fire and the first fully comprehensive tax and wealth firm built specifically for doctors, their families, and their practices. We bring tax planning, investing, retirement strategies, practice level advice, and now insurance and legal coordination all under one roof so your whole financial life works together. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. As you can see on the bottom hand right of your screen, you have our chat icon. Go ahead and say hello. Tell us where you're viewing from. Right next to that, on the left-hand side, you'll see our questions icon. Click on that. As you're going through the presentation, please make sure that you ask your questions in that questions box, and we will answer that at the very end of the presentation. Without further ado, we are excited to have Jorge and Ali with us today. Jorge leads the Physician on Fire community and has been a trusted voice for physicians pursuing financial independence and long-term clarity. Our featured speaker, Ali Oromchian, is a nationally recognized authority in healthcare law, more than 20 years of experience, advising thousands of doctors across the country. From early in his career, he recognized that most healthcare professionals were navigating complex legal and business decisions without the right guidance, a realization that shaped his mission to empower doctors with the knowledge, strategy, and legal support they need to become successful practice owners while staying fully compliant. Ali now brings this deep expertise to Earned as Earned Legal, where he continues to champion the legal needs of healthcare professionals nationwide. So in this session, you'll gain a clearer understanding of the essential tools in estate planning, from wills and trusts to LLCs, powers of attorney, and explore how to identify the right structures to help protect your assets and transfer wealth more efficiently. You'll walk away with a practical framework for how estate planning can connect taxes, retirement accounts, and investments to support a more comprehensive protective plan. So welcome, Jorge. Excited to have you and your audience here today, ready to talk about Earned Legal.
Hey, Amber, how are you? So glad to be here, everyone. I'm Jorge Sanchez from Physician on Fire. This is an amazing webinar. This is a very important webinar because, as you know, 34% of us are going to get sued at one point. The average verdict is about policy limits is a north of about $4 million. So the next hour, I mean, that sounds like, something out of a Godzilla movie. And as I've been practicing medicine for 20 years, and I've heard horror stories about friends of mine, friends of friends who have been had their assets just leak away. The next hour, we're gonna talk about legal structures, like you said, Amber, to keep the number from finding its way to your personal balance sheet. He's an attorney, and I'm interested in hearing from him. So his name is Ali Oromchian from Earned Legal, and looking forward to seeing him. Ali, you ready?
I'm ready. Thank you, Dr. Sanchez, and thank you, Amber, and welcome everyone. Excited to be on this seminar with you and to go through a lot of material in these 45 minutes, but we've got a lot of good stuff. Now, everyone who's listening, every single one of you are high achievers. I think that goes without saying. And you're used to having control. You're used to being in control. And I think that is something, though, that is generally misunderstood, right? It's generally misunderstood because as we think about control, most people think about control, they think of it as having the answers to everything, right? They think of control as being in charge of every decision that needs to be made. And that's really not control. That is pressure. Okay, that is pressure. What real control is about having absolute clarity on your purpose. Okay, it's about having alignment and certainty of the people that you're working with and those around you, your family members, your coworkers, your colleagues, and then the consistency of how those decisions are made brings to us certainty. And that is really, really what control is all about. Now, this is very important when we're talking, about estate planning. This is really important when we're talking about these really important topics because it is about the systems around you. And you have to create systems that allow you to get the outcomes that you're desiring to achieve. And if you don't know what those outcomes are, well, then of course it's super, super hard to know how to get there. But for most of you, you want to be financially independent, you want to do it quickly, and you want to do it in the safest possible way, because the reality is that Dr. Sanchez just mentioned, you are under attack. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, right? There's no doubt about that. We know about that. And the good news is that your estate plan already exists. There is an estate plan for you. That's the good news. The question, I think, is, did you create it or did the state create it? Because in most of the United States, either you take this power of controlling your estate and controlling the wealth you've built and figuring out what you want to do with it. God forbid, if you should pass away or become disabled and can't, attend to your affairs, you either have to decide, I want that control, or I want to give it to the state and let them control it, right? And let them control it. And so, and that decision, of course, for many of you, As I mentioned, you're high achievers. You want that control. You want to be able to do what you want with the assets that you've built. And of course, that's why we're here today, is to kind of give you a little bit of that information. Now, after today's 45-minute to, let's say, hour or so seminar, none of you are going to become healthcare attorneys like I am, and that's not the goal, right? The goal is to get you super familiar with these topics so that you are aware of what you have options to do as you grow your assets, and what you want to do and what you shouldn't do, and where your focus should be depending on those goals. None of you are going to be lawyers at the end of this thing, and my advice is going to be a little bit more high level because of the fact that everyone's in slightly different positions. Some of you are business owners, and you own your own practices. Some of you own your own practices, and also you're heavy investors in real estate and surgery centers and other things. A lot of you are W-2 employees, and you work for groups or hospitals and other institutions. Some of you are 1099s, and you also working for different institutions. So there's a lot of variance there. And so this, although we're going to be talking about a lot of different things, the reality is that your specific unique situation will be slightly different. But this is why we teach these classes the way we do, so that you can take this information and then hone it into your goals. And here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the foundational stuff, which we'll go through. We're going to talk about what kind of trusts are out there and what your options are, why physicians have such a high risk profile. We talk a lot about risk tolerance and things of that nature. So we'll go through that. Dr. Sanchez mentioned some statistics, outside of malpractice. Okay, the biggest risks to you, are things that have to do with your estate, with HR and your businesses. So again, really, really important. And we're going to talk a little bit about some asset protection strategies, some entity planning, if you do own real estate and you own a practice and things of that nature. And then how do you really bring all these things together, right? How do you really bring all these things together? Now, the reason you're listening today, the reason you're setting some time aside for us to go through all of this is not because you have all this extra time in your day. I know you're all very busy, but the reason is that you're in a unique category. Okay? You're in a unique category. Physicians and doctors in general face a ton of exposure. And the reason is because there's a couple of things that are happening. One, many of you are treating patients every single day, and you are dealing with high malpractice exposure. Now, you don't have to, be doing necessarily high risk procedures, but almost anything you do in this day and age on patients or in hospital settings or private clinics and whatnot, you have a high malpractice exposure. And so that's one of the reasons why, of course, a lot of you, if not all of you, should have malpractice insurance and checking on that with your insurance brokers to make sure that if you're doing more surgeries and you're doing more high risk things, that you increase your insurance in those categories. So that's number one. The second thing is you do earn a high income. So as a result of that, you are in the highest tax brackets that exists in many states. And if you're in your states like California or New York or others, then you're paying even more because they already are at the highest that they can be. Now, also, right, you do, because of all the schooling and fellowships and other things that you do start later in your career than most people who are in business, and including other doctors, right? And so as a result, you have a lot more catch up to do in a short amount of time. And this is, again, very unique to physicians. And of course, the more fellowships you go through and the more education you have after residency, the later your career starts where you're making real income. So again, very, very high risk and very unique. And probably the thing that is probably the highest risk is that you have so many people trying to put their hands in your bag that it's hard to know who to trust and who to work with and who not to work with. And is this truly like a really great idea, or is this just another thing that somebody came up with to grab my hard-earned money. And that leads you to slow down and not make decisions and take longer to make decisions. And then you don't have a financial plan, you don't create one, you don't put one into effect, and then suddenly 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 years has gone by, and then you find yourself in your mid to late 40s, and you really have to catch up because you have left these decisions to a point where you can't really recover easily. So these are the reasons why we're here today. And what we're going to talk about is how to avoid all of that, right? All of that. How do you start early? How do you start with some basic foundational things so that you can set your stage as you get married and have kids and grow your practices and earn more and keep earning? How do you build on that foundation so that you never look back and say, man, I wish I had started earlier, or man, I wish I had found an advisor that could help me. I wish somebody had told me this, early in my career. Okay, so when we talk about estate planning, it sounds like a really fancy thing that only multi-billionaires get to do, right? You hear about family offices, and you hear about opening up accounts in the Cayman Islands and Monte Carlo and all this kind of crazy stuff. But that's not the estate planning that our law firm does for doctors around the country. It's not the kind of estate planning that anybody, really is talking about when they're starting to talk to you, because when we talk about estate planning, it's really kind of simple, right? What we want to do is we want a coordinated plan between what's going to happen to your medical practice, what's going to happen to your financial accounts, whether they're with brokerages or whether they're 401k accounts or bank accounts, what's going to happen with those, what's going to happen with your primary home, what's going to happen with any investment properties that you may have, okay? Because a lot of people forget about that. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. Estate planning is, okay, how do you use life insurance strategically? Okay, so some of you have term life insurance, that's great. Some of you have whole life insurance that can be okay in certain situations. What do you do with all of that, right? What do you do with that? Can you use life insurance to pay for some of your taxes upon, God forbid, your passing? Maybe not, right? So the life insurance side of it is a big conversation. And then what happens to your personal stuff, all the great things that you've accumulated? Now, I don't really care about things that don't increase in value, right? So if you've got a normal 2025 car, like, I don't really care about that. But what I do care about is if you've got an asset that appreciates, right? You've got a 62 Mustang, a Porsche, something that increases in value. We care about those classics. We care about art. We care about jewelry. We care about those kinds of things. And the idea is creating this plan that incorporates all of this into a seamless map of what happens if you either cannot make decisions for yourself or if you pass away. And again, here's the world that we're talking about. Feel free to take a screenshot of this. Feel free to take a picture if you're watching us on your computer. But basically, the core documents, what everyone on this webinar should get, and your goal for 2026 should be to get these at least started with, is these basic documents. Okay, now there's a lot of smaller documents which we'll talk about in a second, but these are the biggest ones. Okay, so first is a revocable living trust, right? Every family needs to have one. It is the most flexible document that you can have, whereby you can dictate what happens with your kids, if you have children, as far as guardianship and other things of that nature, what happens with your assets, when things should happen, where you're buried, and all those other details can go all in the revocable living trust. And just like the name sounds, it's revocable, and it's a living, breathing document. So in other words, it can change at any point, right? Your trustee could be your parents, But if they in a few years are, gets ill or they can't do it anymore, then you change it very simply. And it's very inexpensive to do. And it's the most flexible document that you can have as far as your estate planning is this revocable living trust. Then you have this thing called a pour-over will. A pour-over will is just a fancy way of saying that the things that we don't put in your trust, right? So anything that's not increasing in value, a depreciating asset, furniture, things of that nature, things that we don't want to bother to put in a trust, those things will be automatically dumped into the trust by the pour-over will at the time of your death. Okay, so this allows it all to sort of be under one umbrella. That's what a pour-over will is. A financial power of attorney is, pre-death, if you cannot make some financial decisions for yourself, you're incapacitated, you're disabled or whatnot, you're not of the right headspace where you can make decisions, a financial power of attorney comes into place. An advanced health directive is basically, as many of you know, it's a power of attorney for healthcare matters, right? What should happen if you're hospitalized? Do they, use life-saving measures? Where do you maybe want to be buried? Do you donate organs? Those kinds of things. A corporate assignment for those of you who are listening who have a corporation for your practice, or you may have a PLLC, a professional limited liability company, or maybe just a limited liability company. You assign those shares into the trust. So again, we don't do anything now, but at time of death, those shares get assigned to the trust so that the estate can manage the affairs of the practice. And then sometimes if you've got a big estate, then there are irrevocable trusts that we can use for life insurance and things of that nature that you can use that are going to be kept out of your estate for tax purposes. And so if you have $3, $4, $5, $6, $7 million of life insurance, we don't want that to eat up your from your estate in your estate, and so that you end up paying taxes on that. We want that to be separated, and an irrevocable trust does that for you. Okay, so that's your world, right? That's what your world. Now, what are we trying to avoid, right? What are we trying to avoid? Well, remember what I said earlier, right? If you don't have a trust, right? If you don't have the state has an estate plan for you. And that estate plan is called going through probate, right? And going through probate is a process. It's basically a big lawsuit that happens whereby the state decides what should happen to your assets. First of all, they decide who owns your asset. And you might say, Ali, I don't understand. I own my assets. Well, do you? Right? Do you? I mean, if you have a loan on your primary home, well, the bank owns your home, actually. You're just making some payments on it. And so the court system figures out who owns what, sells assets, to pay off debt and various other things. And then figures out who should get those assets, right? So, and it could be your next of kin, it could be your spouse, it could be your children. It just kind of depends. Now, the problem with this is that, and this is especially bad now, since COVID, but pre-COVID, it was about 12 to 18 months of time to go through probate. For many years after probate, it was way longer than that because of all the obvious reasons that many of you know. It's gotten a little bit better now, but it's still a very long process, and it does eat up, anywhere from 3 to 7% of the value of your estate. And when you think about that, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money you're paying the state and lawyers and others to figure out what should happen to your money, right? I mean, it's just like the silliest thing. Why would we pay all that money for the state to make decisions for us when we know that it's probably the wrong decision to begin with, right? The wrong decision to begin with. Now, Dr. Sanchez mentioned it earlier, right? There's a lot of lawsuits, right? If you are divorced, if you have children from a first marriage, if you have, if you're remarried, there's a lot of complicating factors that courts really don't take into account the personal inner relationships. So if you don't have a trust, you're really, really giving the power to them to figure it all out. And it can be really risky to do. So again, like, just remember, if you have any goals for 2026, any goals at all, right, it should be to get these core documents, right? If you can get these core documents figured out for yourself, you are on your path. Now, there are obviously a lot more sophisticated estate planning things that, you know, we can talk about at some point, but the core is really where it begins. Now, let's talk about a couple of different types of trust that you will hear about. Okay, and these are, you know, these are important because, you know, you're going to hear about them and they're going to sound, you know, very very complex, but the green on the screen is really the sort of the bottom line of what you need to think about, right? So remember, the revocable living trust is the core document, right? This probates, this avoids probate. It is the easiest way for your tax professionals to navigate the complex tax situations when you do pass away, and so it is a very flexible, you know, trust to use, and it is very simple to use. And so for many of you who don't have anything, this is the place to start, because you can always build on them, right? You can always build on them. But you know, you don't get any creditor protection, you know, with the trust, and so that's important to know. Now, there are insurances and other things that you can do to protect yourself from creditors, but again, the revocable trust, the revocable living trust is really an important thing. Now, a testamentary trust is slightly different, right? It's slightly different. So this is a way of making sure that some of the assets that you have are left to specific people, children, spouses, and others. And it's done, you know, kind of, you know, through the probate process. It's not ideal in many scenarios because of that. And the reason is because it doesn't really, it doesn't, you know, it's slow, and it's really only super important if you don't have sophisticated estate plan. You know, you have, let's say, a revocable living trust, and you, or maybe you don't, you have a huge estate and you don't want to put in the time to create a more sophisticated plan, then you can pass, you know, your assets on to, you know, minors and maybe your spouse through a testamentary trust. Now, it's not my favorite for a lot of reasons, but that, you know, from a basic perspective, especially because it goes through probate, which, you know, we always want to avoid, you know, it is slightly risky. Now, an irrevocable asset protection trust is considered an advanced trust. Okay, it's considered, and the reason is because this is irrevocable, right? That means, unlike the revocable one, okay, it does shield your assets from creditors. It does shield your assets from, you know, malpractice claims and HR lawsuits and things of that nature. But it's one of those trusts that when you set it up, it pretty much is set in stone, okay? And you must, the reason that you have those creditor protections is because you are giving up control. So when you hear people talk about, you know, I set up a trust in the Cayman Islands, or I set up trust in this, in this foreign country or this other jurisdiction, and I get creditor protection, is because they're using a professional trustee to now manage their entire estate. Okay, their entire estate. So they have no control. Now, because they have no control, on the day-to-day stuff, that's how you get the creditor protections and what. Now, at the end of the day, you've given instructions to the trustees that you've hired. They will do some of the things that you want, but it's very hard to change, right? It's very hard to change. A lot of our doctors don't love this, even if they're in a high risk, job and whatnot. They don't love it because they like control, like we talked about early on, right? They want control over their estate. They don't want to give that up to someone else. And there is a lot of trust that you're giving by giving control to a professional trustee to control everything, because it's now their job to manage all your money and all of your assets, and that can be That can be, you know, risky, especially if you don't have a long-term relationship with some of these professional trustees, because you never know what can happen, of course, right? The final thing is the life insurance trust, which we touched on a little bit earlier. You know, you can put life insurance in that. It's outside of your estate, which is great. You know, it's outside of your taxable estate, which is great. And it's funded by life insurance. Now, the nice thing about that, right, is again, you can use it to pay estate taxes. You know, you can use it to pay other things if you've got a high exposure potentially. Okay. Now, some other structures, you know, depending on, you know, if you're married, and what you can, you know, what people will talk to you about is they'll talk to you about a couple of different types of trusts inside a revocable living trust, and these go slightly by different names, but basically this is how it's split up, right? So the most common is called a bypass trust, an AB trust. And what they do is they basically split your estate into two trusts. You know, one is for, you know, the surviving spouse, okay, and that, you know, remains there, and it's still revocable. The trust for the spouse that is deceased now becomes irrevocable, right? Because they're now deceased and outside of the estate. Okay, so this is really great. These AB trusts are great if you've got a huge estate that is beyond the estate tax limits, and so you need to have some protections in place. So you split it up, right? So you split it up. So that's the most common that we see, especially with our doctors, because they either have big estates or they, you know, have plans to grow, you know, their estate into something, you know, with investments and other things. And so we set it up that way from the very beginning. Now, the next thing is called a disclaimer trust, right? And the disclaimer trust is slightly different than an AB trust in the sense that the surviving spouse, right? The surviving spouse can basically disclaim some of the assets that are given to him or her upon the other spouse's death, that allows for a little bit more flexibility in terms of decision making from a tax perspective. Between the two, I would, I would always go with sort of an AP trust because I think there's certain assurances there. Usually, the spouses are not in an emotional state to sometimes make these decisions. They don't know who to go to and things of that nature. And so sometimes, deadlines are missed. Things are not disclaimed. They're sad because of obviously they've lost their life partner, and they have a lot of other pressures coming towards them, and they're not in the headspace to disclaim things. And so sometimes, that doesn't prove to be as effective. A simple trust, as it sounds like, is very straightforward. You basically take your assets and you give it to your spouse, whatever is in, is part of your estate. If you're a deceased spouse, goes directly to your spouse. This is great if you're under the estate tax limits, if you don't have a large estate, and keeps things, kind of simple and straightforward. Children's trusts are meant, as it sounds like, for your kids, and you assign a trustee specific for them, and upon your death, those get created, and those assets are held for the children and it can be distributed to them at different ages. This is great if you have super young children, or if you have children who maybe are not as mature as you would like them to be, and you're concerned about them getting potentially millions of dollars, all at once, then this could be a really great way of protecting against that. And then special needs trust. This is, for, children who, may have some special needs, or have some other additional care that may be required either for health or other reasons. And this allows you to, again, to name a trustee to help fund that for their specific needs. Again, the nice thing about this is that it, regardless of what you put in there, if there are federal, benefits that they might get because of their medical condition or their disabilities, you typically do not get disqualified simply because there is a special need trust in place. So again, a really great option for those who have that. Okay, now as we pivot a little bit, let's talk a little bit about the asset protection strategies that you could face with regard to your own assets. As Dr. Sanchez mentioned, many physicians get sued at some point in their career outside of malpractice. A big part of these numbers is tied to not malpractice, of course, but to personal liability, to investments, to partnerships, to HR lawsuits, to things of that nature. And the numbers can be pretty big. The numbers can be pretty big, especially on certain claims that are related to, let's say, your employees at work, or business partnerships that you may have gotten into. And so having entities and structures in place that protect you is really, really important. And I want to talk very specifically about a couple of these things, right? So first of all, what's easy and what you need to know 100% is that having insurance is a must. Okay, so most of you have malpractice, I hope. You need to really think about disability insurance. If you don't have any, or you haven't updated it in a long time, then it's important to start talking about experts on that. There's umbrella insurance that you can get for yourself from a personal level. Again, hugely important. You never know what's going to happen. They're very inexpensive to get in general, even for $2 to $5 million. You can get them, and it's not costly at all. So the insurance side, I think, is there, and it's I think very, very important to keep in mind. But the one thing that I see our physicians not do very often is not set up LLCs or entity structures for some of the higher risk things that you do. Okay, now if we were doing this live in person, I should say, then we are live, by the way. I'm not a robot. But if we were doing this in person, I would ask you to raise your hands, and what usually is the case, that about maybe 20% of the room would raise their hand that they have a LLC or some other corporate entity set up for commercial or residential real estate that they have. Okay, now I'm not talking about your primary home, but if you Airbnb anything, if you got any short-term rentals, if you've got commercial property, a sort of a multi-unit building or anything of that nature, you want to make sure that in addition to insurance, I mean, the insurance is is obvious, but in addition to all of that, setting up an LLC or corporate structure is very important to protect your personal assets, because things happen, right? Things happen. There's fires in buildings. There's damage that can occur from fallen trees and earthquakes and other similar items. Tornadoes, hurricanes. All of these things are things that can cause you to have liability when you own commercial properties. Now, the short-term rental thing is something that everyone overlooks, because sometimes you might buy a home, right? You might buy a home and you might say, you know what, this is going to be our future home, right? This is our retirement home, and then you may just buy it under your name because you got a normal mortgage on it, and you are thinking, well, eventually I'm going to live there, so I'll just keep it that way. But then in the meantime, you're short-term renting it. Well, that's a problem, right? That's a problem, because things can happen, right? Things can happen. I will share with you a personal story. So my wife and I, we live here in California, and we want to, eventually one day retire in the Lake Tahoe area. And so right after COVID, so a property became available, and we bought it. And if Lake Tahoe, of course, there's bears everywhere. And so the previous owners had put a mat, right? They had put a mat, and it's an electrified mat that you put because to avoid bears coming. Because as soon as they put their feet, their paws on the mat, what ends up happening is that they get a little bit of a sensation, and then that sensation itself causes them to back off. And and it doesn't hurt the animal, and it's just kind of an uncomfortable feeling for them, and they back off. And knock on wood, we've never had a break-in since they've installed these mats. So that sounds great. Well, that mat, we found out, and I'll tell you the story, is right next to the spa, right? A sort of a spa, not an in-ground spa, but a bigger spa. And so what happened was we were out there one weekend, and our kids were in the spa splashing around and doing what they do. And I walked outside and I took them a plate of fruit and drinks and stuff for them to eat. And I stepped on this mat with water on it with my bare feet. Guess what happened there? That's right. I was electrified by this mat, and I fell my legs gave out in a second, and I just fell. Thank God, the glass and the tray and stuff that I had held for the kids, I had already kind of put down, so they were able to hold it. But I immediately fell. And so it was not, it was not great. It was not great. A very scary moment. And could have done some serious damage, to my heart and other things, because it wasn't just the mat, right? The mat is not that powerful, but it was the mat with the water that just sort of amplified. Now, imagine, God forbid, imagine if that was an elderly person. That could have been their heart, right? They could have hit their head. There could have been so many other bad things that could have happened because of that. And so that liability is those kind of things that we don't think about, that you don't think about, where you need to make sure you have an entity in place, so that if God forbid something does happen, right, you've got that corporate structure protecting you, right? You got that corporate structure protecting you. And I know people say, oh, it's complex. It's not complex, right? Especially if you have an LLC and whatnot. It's very simple and straightforward. And those really do protect you, right? Really do protect you. And so if you've got any STRs, short-term rentals, if you've got a practice, if you've got residential property that's not your primary home, if you've got commercial property that's not, that you're renting out, or there's tenants and other things that are coming through, all of these things are things that you need an entity for. So make sure you use that. Okay. Now, as we think about the structure, right, of the assets, what we want, the way it looks is like this slide. So you've got your revocable trust. Remember, this is the foundational trust to have, and so just start with that. But you've got a revocable trust, and then if you own a practice, right, you've got your practice, kind of in there. Now you see there's not a direct line into the revocable trust, because we're going to be assigning the shares of the professional practice into the trust at the time of death. We don't want the trust to necessarily be the owner of the practice. In many states, as only physicians can own a medical practice, and so a trust that has you and maybe your spouse on there, would not qualify, but you can assign it to the trust. And the reason you can assign it to the trust is because every state, in one way or another, allows a trust or an estate to manage a practice for a period of time after the doctor's death, to sell the business, to transfer the patients, to do things to pass it on to another professional. And so we assign the shares. Okay. Now, rental properties, income side, if you're investing in restaurants, by the way, don't ever invest in restaurants, but horror stories galore, as I'm sure you've heard, but investing in those, all of these things are things that you should put in LLCs or other entity structures. Okay, and so you see these slides. They kind of give you a little bit more summary of what we've already talked about. The key to keeping these legal protections in place is actually pretty simple. You just need to make sure, right? You just need to make sure that you're keeping the finances separate and that you're not doing any personal purchases as a result. Okay, so just remember that. You know, if you're going to have a real estate LLC, you know, do all the expenses you want, but don't run your dry cleaning through there. You know, don't pay your kids' tuitions. Those kind of things is where things become a little bit more problematic. Okay, now, how do we bring this really all together, right? The way we sort of bring this all together is you want to start to think about these different levers, right? These different wealth levers, because all of, you know, to have complete control, you have to have clarity, like we talked about. And having clarity means that you have a really strong tax plan, right? So you're focused on your income tax. How do you limit your income tax, you know, strategically and still falling below the radar of the IRS and other things, right? That's really important. But there's only so much that you can do there, okay? Then your estate tax is something you have to plan ahead for, right? So we plan and we look into the future of seeing where your growth is going, you know, where, you know, your investments are going, where's the real estate going, and then you plan for that, right? Capital gains. There's, you know, if you're selling assets, you're going to have long-term capital gains or short-term capital gains. How do you avoid that? You know, Earned actually has a really, really strategic plan for lowering or sometimes eliminating capital gains on the sale of assets. And so, you know, they don't talk about it publicly because it's sort of their secret sauce. It's one of the things, one of the perks of working with them. But again, really important if you feel like you're going to be selling assets to talk to them about that. If you want to skip generations, you know, send things to, you know, give things to grandchildren over your children. That's an option. I don't love doing generation skipping planning because I think it's ripe with problems, potential problems. I think giving it to your, you know, children and then having them figure out what to do with it sometimes can be the better plan. But as we kind of think about it, you know, there's ERISA protections with regard to retirement accounts that you got to think about. You know, try to maximize all the 401k profit sharing plans you can. You know, if you own a practice, you can, again, I'm no expert on the 401k side and profit sharing side, but you know, you can put, you know, close to $70,000 away these days. It's really wonderful. If you're working for someone as a W-2 or 1099 or W-2, you can still max it out and take advantage of their profit sharing. If you're a 1099, you can set up these things called solo 401ks, and if done the right way, you can put up to $72,000 this year. I mean, I'm telling you, there's a lot of really great, simple, straightforward things that you can do with professional help where you can maximize all of these. One of our partners, loves the backdoor Roth conversions. And so again, really great, idea to do. You do need someone to walk you through it, but that allows you to really put money into an IRA that you usually wouldn't be able to because you're physicians and you earn too much. Beneficiary designations, important to look at that. Who are you putting down as beneficiaries of your account? If you have children and they're minors, we always recommend put the trust as the beneficiary. As the children grow up and they become adults and maybe more responsible, then we can change the planning a little bit and put them as beneficiaries of various accounts. But again, really, really important. And then finally, make sure that you know when the required minimum distributions are as part of your plan. Okay. Now, as we get into the last, 15 or so minutes, what I want to talk about is how do you kind of set up your entire estate plan? Now here, it's a 9 steps. We're going to go through it pretty quickly. First is you got to start organizing everything, right? So organizing your emergency information, who people should go to in case of things happen, financials, passwords, I'm a big fan of having a lot of things under one umbrella, right? So, bank accounts, business, personal under one bank, having, retirement accounts with one institution. I think those things make things a lot easier. Figuring out who your fiduciaries are, who your trustees are, who's going to be your lawyer to do your estate plan, who's your CPA that you trust, who's your financial advisors, within Earn that you trust. Like, who are these folks, right? And start creating a plan, right? Start creating an estate plan. If you have minor children, figuring it out with them, right? Figuring out, treating each child separately. My middle daughter, I have 3 daughters, and my middle one, she suffers from epilepsy. So our planning for her is going to be very different than our planning for our oldest or our youngest. And so planning for them and, college and other things, again, really important. Insurance coverage, right? Make sure you're up to date on that. Nobody likes insurance, but it is really important to make sure it's up to date and that you've got everything. And of course, one of the worst decisions that anybody can ever make is, sometimes you have to make it, but one of the worst financial decisions is getting a divorce. And so planning for, that I think is important, either pre-marriage, or if you are, going down that road, and having ideas about that, I think is really, really important, because again, it could lead to really disastrous impacts on your retirement plan. Finally, for those of you that are business owners, organize your business assets. Make sure, your CPA works with doctors. They have experience working with doctors. If they don't, if you ever have an embezzler, or if you ever have any leakage of money coming through the practice, and many of you, because you're so busy, things like this do happen. It's hard for a non physician specific CPA to catch those. And so make sure you're working with them. Make sure you have a corporation for your practice. And then what I think is one of the most important things to do is make sure people are communicating. I mean, one of the beauties of Earn, I think, is the fact that everyone's under the same roof, so everyone's talking to one another all the time. If that's not your situation right now, then you got to make it that, right? Because your lawyers are busy, your CPAs are busy, your financial advisors are busy. Everyone's thinking everyone's doing something. But if they're not communicating, if everything is not under the same umbrella, it's disastrous. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, because many of you are in situations, hospital systems and other things, where everything is under the same umbrella. You are using the same EHR systems, and you see the benefits of it. And so, think about that when it comes to your financial plan. Imagine everything being under the same umbrella, and then meet with your advisors every year. I think that's vital, and at minimum every 5 years, do a comprehensive plan to make sure you're still on track, that things haven't changed hugely. Okay. All right. Some myths as we end. Estate planning, and this is probably the most common one I hear, which is estate planning is only for the Silicon Valley, billionaires or whatnot. No, that's not the case at all. Estate planning is basically, very simply, as we talked about earlier, a way to have your assets transfer to the people you care about, have your assets managed by people you care about, and leaving the state completely out of it, right? Because otherwise the state will take money. The feds will take your hard-earned money, and that is ridiculous. The cost of something like this, it's not costly at all to put a estate plan together. You can budget anywhere, I would say, between $3,000 to maybe $7,000, depending on the complexity of your plan. So it's not that much. It's a one-time expense, very straightforward, and so again, not expensive. What is expensive is going through probate, of course, right? Going through probate. Now, the ideal client, I would recommend, is if you own a practice, you should have an estate plan. If you're married and you're done having children, get an estate plan. If you own a home, those are good times to get something together. because you've gone through one or two major life things, and then you can build on it. Remember, setting it up is some work. It does take some time to set one up, but once you set it up, you can just add to it and revise it. It's very simple through amendments. Okay, so not super complex for you to lose sleep over. And then remember, a will is not enough. You need a living trust to avoid probate. Okay, that is hugely important. Please do not use ChatGPT or any of these web services. They are not meant for you. The legal Zooms and all these other programs out there, they're meant for the non-professionals, right? Most of America can use them because they have very simple estates. But if you own your own business, if you have high incomes, you have high risk, you have different things, you need it to be done professionally for you. And again, the cost is not that much at all. So it's really kind of just a no-brainer. At the end of the day, I think you guys can see that, it's not, there are a lot of complexities to this, but, EARN tries to make things as simple as possible by bringing everything under one umbrella, so that it is all seamless. It's all interrelated and coordinated effort by all the parties, so that you do not only are protected if, God forbid, you should pass away or get disabled, but also, you're paying the least tax. You've got the best insurance if you get sued. And your family is in a position where they'll thank you not just for the life that you gave them while you were alive and well, but also that you gave them a life and the assets that you worked so hard for, so that they could build their own life and their own family with your hard-earned effort. And and it all begins with the living trust. Okay. All right, Amber, I think I'm going to hand this back to you. I know we're getting, I think, a lot of questions, so I'll pass it on to you.
Yes, awesome, Ali. Thank you so much. That was amazing insights. A lot of information thrown at you. If you have questions, please, we are still taking them in the question box right now. Jorge's going to join us in a second as well to kind of help bring that physician perspective and really give you guys a voice. But yeah, let's go ahead and start with our first questions. So here we go. Welcome back, Jorge.
Hey. So
All right.
you're gonna do the question. I just want to remind everybody you're watching a Physician's Guide to Asset Protection, Estate Planning, and Wealth Strategy. It's not just, we always on finance, we talk about asset allocation, asset location, and now asset protection is the new guideline now. If you arrived late, you'll get an email with the link so you can see the webinar in its entirety in case you've got to take notes. So Amber, let's go ahead. Let's do some questions.
Let's do it. All right. So our first question is, can the trustee be a family member, son or daughter? Can you clarify for one of our audience members?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, the answer is absolutely. The trustee and the guardian for if you have young children can be a family member. Of course, they can also be your own children if they're adults. You just want to make sure that they're mature enough to be able to handle the work that is involved if something happens to you. But they don't have to be lawyers or business people. They just have to have the instincts to know who to reach out to and who to seek help. It's very important for them to know where your estate plans are, right? So if it's in a safe at home or it's in a box at a bank, I think it's important to let them know. But yeah, it can be pretty much anybody. And here's the point I made earlier that I want to make sure everyone remembers. It's a living, breathing document. So let's say you put in your son as the trustee, and then he goes through some financial problems, and suddenly you're like, well, I don't know if he would be the right person to manage it. Then you can just amend it and put your daughter, right? And then if things go back, then you can change it back if you want to. So it's very flexible. So
great, yeah, great information. I think anyone can really benefit from that. Our next question is, Apologies, there we go. All right, here we go. Is the irrevocable asset protection trust the sort of thing that can be used to protect a property that we moved to its own LLC? This example is a lake property. The idea is that if there was a legal risk related to the lake property, they couldn't come after my personal assets. What do you think about that, Ali?
Yeah, no, great question. So the irrevocable asset protection trust really, is meant, for things like life insurance and things of that nature. That's where I would kind of focus on that. I think if you've got a property and you want to protect against it, putting it in an LLC, I think is the first thing you can do. And then I would just get some insurance on that, and that is perfect, right? I think that will do the job for what you need in terms of protecting against any legal risks and things that might come down the road. So that's how I would handle the properties, and then I would use the ILIT for life insurance more so than anything else. So, but the short answer, I guess, is yes, you can, do it if you want to layer it on top of an LLC. It just has to be sort of structured correctly, because some people just set it up, not perfectly, but you can. And as long as the LLC owns the lake property and then the trust owns the LLC, then it could have that additional protection. But you don't need it if you don't want to, because the LLC is the actual first line of defense.
Great advice on that. Shelly, if you need any more advice personally on that matter, I would definitely click that book your free consult, take a look at the screen. Ali has his information on there to get a little bit deeper dive on that. Another question here from Shelly is, don't put your dry cleaning in there. Understood. What about the other direction? If I accidentally pay the property taxes out of my personal checking instead of the LLC checking, could that be problematic?
Oh my gosh, Shelly, I wish I could give you a hug. That is such a great question, because this happens all the time. And no, it's not a problem if it accidentally happens, as long as you show in the books that it was offset. And what I mean by that is, let's say it happens and you find out that this happened, then you show in the books that this is a loan that, let's say, the LLC needs to pay you back personally because you paid it out of your pockets. As long as you do that, you should be fine. There's maybe a couple of additional legal documents and things that your CPA would want, but as long as you do that, you should be good. But if you continue paying it out of your personal account and commingling it that way without taking it into account, then that could be a problem. Yeah, great question.
And I love how she worded that too. That was perfect. Yeah. All right, next question. It seems like there isn't a revocable trust option that offers asset protection for lawsuits. So is the best way just to maximize insurance, just to invest in protected retirement accounts and have an LLC if you don't want to do an irrevocable trust?
Yes. So the answer is yes. I mean, he's basically right on the core premise. But in terms of the conclusion, I want to sharpen that a little bit. So a revocable trust doesn't provide asset protection. Absolutely, that's true. It's a probate / estate planning tool, not necessarily a liability shield. But the alternative isn't just saying insurance plus retirement accounts. It's just one layer of that. So what I would do is I would stack things. So what I mean by that, because remember, asset protection isn't just ever one thing, right? If anybody ever tells you, do this one thing and you'll be 100% protected, that's never right. So it's a stacking of protections, and because they do different things. So insurance basically absorbs the hit, right? The LLC, right, that's the next stack, contains the risk, right? So it doesn't expand. Then you've got some statutory protections that protect some of your assets, like your home and whatnot. And then the irrevocable side of things that you may not want to do removes those assets from exposure. So So basically, if you don't want to do the irrevocable trust, which I totally understand, then you just do items 1, 2, and 3: insurance, entity, and then you've got your statutory provisions in place. And then if you do those 3 things, you're going to be in really, really good shape.
Wonderful, Bryce. I hope that helps kind of clarify that question. Again, reach out to Ali for a little bit deeper dive on that. And if you need help setting all that up. Jorge, let's kind of, do you have any questions for him before we do our key takeaways?
Great. No, a couple questions. So a lot of, as we know, 1 out of 5 physicians in the U.S. is 1099, or they're part of a practice, right? Private practice or own a practice. So Ali, if you're a physician who's a partner in a group versus a solo practitioner with a PC, how did this asset protection or allocation, how is it different with those 2 situations?
Well, the general things we talked about today apply, Jorge, exactly the same for both of those groups. But there's a very important document that we didn't talk about today because it's really only for partnerships that everybody in a partnership should have. And it's a terrible name, but it's called a buy-sell agreement. Okay, a buy-sell agreement. The way a buy-sell agreement works between partners is that it basically says that if one partner passes away, that partner's family will get the life insurance money. In exchange, the family, the estate, will transfer ownership of that partner, the deceased partner's interest, to the other partner. Okay? This is a really important document because, one, the surviving partner doesn't need to go get a loan and deal with the widow or to figure out kind of what's happening with the estate and the valuations, because emotions will run high, right? And sometimes the value of a practice falls when one partner passes away because the other partner can't handle all the volume, right? So what ends up happening is that existing partner, gets the shares, but they haven't paid a dime. The life insurance is what's paid the family. So highly, highly recommend buy-sell agreements for anybody in a partnership. And very simple to put together. You can do it with life insurance, and very inexpensive, but a really important estate planning tool for partners.
And what if there is no buy-sell agreement?
Then if there is no buy-sell agreement, then they should do all the things we talked about today for their own personal estate plan, but the practice will be up in the air.
Yeah, and the valuation goes down, right? That's what you're implying.
It does.
If you are, it looks the other way. If you're a partner and your partners, if you don't see a buy-sell agreement, it also hurts you if you're the survivor in the practice, because your value of your practice is going to go down and you can't sell it.
Yeah, and the spouse of the deceased doctor is going to think that they're going to want the most for the practice, for their shares, and that's when there's disputes and stuff that occur because as the surviving partner, what are you going to do? Try to squeeze the spouse now, and it just makes things really complicated. Yeah.
Yeah, you said that us physicians are in professions, we're one of the top most sued professionals in the country. If you're a doctor carrying like a 1 mil, 3 million malpractice coverage, what does an above policy verdict actually look like in practice?
Well, it depends. It depends already on the specialty, right? Like if you're internal medicine, a 1-3 could probably be fine. But if you're an OB/GYN, if you're an ophthalmologist, you're a surgeon, that nowhere near can cover it, right? And so I'm no insurance expert, but I can tell you that and we don't do any malpractice in our law firm. We only do business law, so helping buying, selling of practices and, employment agreements, 1099s, estate planning. But what I would say is I would talk to your insurance brokers about that, because a lot of people have gotten these policies early in their career and they've never upped them despite doing more complex and risky, procedures.
Got it. If you're you talked about the late start piece, and it resonates, who's finished. Most physicians, they do residency early, but some people do fellowship and, later, right? So for the late starters, because you said, we start late.
Yeah.
When a doc is doing like a decade of catch up, and you're behind in your schedule, what protection structure should be in place from year one as an attending versus the one that is later in life who's waiting for the income to stabilize?
Well, I mean, I think it's a lot of the things we talked about. If they're married and they have children or whatnot, at that point, I would do a basic revocable living trust, just so they have that in case something happens. I would start, depending on if they're, if they're a 1099 type setup, I would, if they are, I actually think, the 1099s are leaving a lot of wealth on the table by not setting up these really strategic solo 401k accounts with profit sharing, because you can put, I think it's $72,000 this year. And I mean, it's just like you can catch up really quickly, Jorge, if you're doing all the right things. What I think sometimes people hear is they hear all these podcasts of like the people who are these experts, but they're not talking to doctors. They're talking about the general American population, and that doesn't apply, right? There are so many things that are unique with physicians that they need a physician-led strategic advice that allows them to not just, fast track their growth, but to do it strategically, so they're, one, paying less tax, but then two, that money doesn't go away based on lawsuits and these other things.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I talked to a lot of doctors in cafeterias, and that's exactly that. I hear a lot of stuff repeated, that it's advice for people in a different income bracket, and we're just in a very painful income bracket that if you don't manage it, it's gonna steamroll over you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I live in Florida, and a lot of the docs, that I hear, they say that no plan just means the spouse gets everything by default. And in Florida, I guess the question for you is, what does interstate succession actually do for, like, let's say a $3 million estate where there's one surviving spouse and 2 kids from a prior marriage? How does that look?
I mean, it depends on the planning. Like if the spouse has their own income and things, like things could be passed to the kids, directly. At $3 million, I mean, that's not a big enough estate where you may want to pass the spouse, right? You may want it to go directly to the spouse, and with professional advice, let the spouse be cared for, for their life, and then whatever's left at that point, and hopefully it's grown from there, especially if they have their own career, then it could be passed on to the kids. I really, really advise against generation skipping stuff, right? Like, generation skipping, I think is really, hard to do and ripe with potential, problems. So, I prefer, things to go to the spouses and then go from there. I mean, I think for this year, I think the federal tax exemption for one person is like $15 million, and like it's $30 million for, a married couple. So if you have an estate that's bigger than that, then I think generation skipping stuff and some of these other things, make sense. But, doing a simple AB trust or whatnot, it works really well.
Got it. Great. No, that's one of the key things about the complexity, like I mentioned, and that's why it resonates that a company like Earned manages that, because what happens is you have to have the estate planning talk to the CPA, who talks to the accountant for it to. We just have such complicated property structure, investment structure. We may be part of a practice. you may be part of a group that you have some equity in the group, and that's at risk.
Yeah.
So you need to have everybody in there. You got to have someone who understands healthcare law. There's this word that I learned. It's the corporate practice of medicine.
That's right.
The corporate practice of medicine has very different laws and treats doctors very differently. And if we assume that we're being given the treatment of a regular owner who owns a laundromat, you're gonna be in for a whole lot of hurt.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah, the exposure is different. The exposure is different. The opportunity is different. I mean, it's all different. And I agree with you. I mean, I think one of the reasons why the concept of having everything under one umbrella works is that, like you said, it's just more efficient communication between the parties that can make the biggest difference, right? And when people are not talking to one another, the person that gets hurt is the client, right? Because people are talking past each other, and things are left on the table. So yeah, that's good.
Yeah, no, this is a great webinar, Ali. I hope we get you again. I mean, I think the main 3 points from what I get from Ali today is, number one, like the doctors, the default plan's already running. If you don't write your own plan, the state, whatever state you're at, either Mississippi, Florida, wherever you're at, that state has one ready for you. There's a judge in the county who already knows how to distribute your assets and knows how to pick a guardian for your kids.
That's right.
You decide what happens, or someone in the courthouse is going to do it for you.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
So that's one thing. Number two, there's this belief insurance alone is not asset protection. Malpractice coverage is the floor, but it's not the ceiling. For the 34% of us who get sued at some point, we need layers underneath. And for example, an LLC for the rentals, a PC for the practice, and a RISA qualified retirement account holding everything they can hold, and an umbrella policy sitting on top. This layer is actually, Kevlar and Teflon and things protecting you from a lawsuit. The other thing, like you said, Ali, the lawsuit doesn't always come from the OR if you're an anesthesiologist or you're a gynecologist. Sometimes it walks barefoot on a Sunday afternoon in your lake house, right?
That's right.
And number three, the plan is it's coordination. It's not the documents. That you can create the documents, but it's the coordination that's the key. It's the flywheel. The estate attorney who's never spoken to your CPA you basically have half a plan. If the trust was drafted, like let's say 2014, and hasn't been open since then, you haven't kept up with your life or with the tax code, you're gonna be screwed. Beneficiary designations on a 401 override every other document you signed, right? You need to find advisors that talk to each other, understand your complexity, and review and plan every time you meet with someone. And that's why I definitely think we should all consider either doing it yourself and sleep uncomfortably at night, or talk to Earn. There's a link there. There's a QR code. Check it out. So glad to have everyone here. I learned a lot, Ali.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And
Awesome.
thanks
Thank
to all
you
the
so much.
physicians for being here.
Awesome. Thank you. See you guys again. Appreciate it.
Take care. Have a good
Have a
one.
great day.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Dr.